Right, natural and synthetic macromolecules. Now, macro, big molecules are very large structures with lots and lots of covalent bonds holding them together. We saw some last year. There they are there. But also long chain molecules, long carbon chain molecules, are a good example of macromolecules. We can make them. We've seen this with alkenes, remember? Addition polymerization. So if we take lots of ethene molecules, monomers, we can make an ethene polymer, polyethene. But this is called addition polymerization. There's another example of polymerization which is called condensation polymerization. Now you will have heard of nylon, and it's a synthetic polymer. It's only been around 100 years or so, and it's formed by a condensation polymerization reaction. So there are two monomers here. What happens is the NH2 groups, these are called amino groups, they react with the acid groups on the end of the other molecule. Notice there are 6 carbons here and there are 6 carbons here. This is often called nylon 6,6. So these molecules attach to the OHs, or they attach to this carbon and they react as so. And what happens is a water molecule is lost, which is why they're called condensation polymers, condensation polymerization. And this bond here is called an amide link. There's an amide link formed. With the polyalkenes, no molecules were lost, but here a water molecule is lost, isn't it? And then the end of the next molecule reacts with the end of another molecule, acid molecule, and another amide link is formed, and another water molecule is condensed. And the reaction continues until many thousands of monomers make one long polymer, in this case nylon. Okay, so we can summarize this in a slightly different way. Nylon is a polyamide because it contains lots of amide links, and we abbreviate it in IGCSE. They like using these boxes. Essentially, you have a dicarboxylic acid. Oxylic, that's a spelling mistake, that should be an I. No, that shouldn't be there. Dicarboxylic acid, no O there. So you've got a molecule with a carboxylic acid group on one end and on the other end, and a diamine molecule with a NH2 on one end and an NH2 on the other end. So all of these acids meet one of these amines and they form links, okay, to form this polyamide, which is nylon. Where's the amide link in this molecule, in this polymer? There you go. This would continue into space. Essentially, the amide link is a carbon double bond oxygen, NH, polyamide. Right, watch that video. I think it's quite an old-fashioned video on the production and the use of nylon. It's quite interesting. It's been around for a long time now. Terylene is another classic synthetic polymer. In this case, it's a polyester. We saw the esters were formed before, and you're going to see why it's called a polyester. So these are the monomers. Benzene 1,4-dicarboxylic acid. Well, what's that? It's this funny Mercedes benzene symbol with a carboxylic acid group on both sides, and then it's this funny alcohol. It's like ethanol, but with an extra OH on the other carbon, ethane 1,2-diol, and they come together. The ends of each of these molecules, a water molecule is lost. That's why they're called condensation polymers, and they form a chain. And that chain, if you look at it, look through this, you get lots of, this must be an American site, a bunch of water comes off, and this is what's called the repeating unit. So this bit has come from the acid, and this bit has come from this double alcohol, diol. Terylene is what we call it, dacron in some places. Which link is present in this polymer? It's the ester link. So it's a polyester. This ester link is continued all the way along the molecule. Right, this is a bit of work for you. Some uses of nylon and terylene. They are everywhere. There's a couple of clues on the pictures. We need to revisit the ideas that we started talking about a few slides ago about the environmental problems caused by plastics, synthetic polymers, and think about some possible solutions. Now, this has become more and more obvious over the last 10 years, that the way the oceans are starting to suffer with our abuse of plastics is really a stark reminder that we have to look after this home that we've got, this planet. So we need to start thinking about how chemistry can, as well as solving problems and making our lives more comfortable and easier, how chemistry can look after the environment. Now, what happens? Why is this a problem? Well, to make plastics, we use fossil fuels. So lots of fossil fuels are constantly being burned in order to make the plastic that we use in so many different applications, and then we have to get rid of. So we're using up fossil fuels. This is one of the problems. We're using up fossil fuels to make these plastics, and we're adding to global warming when we burn them so that we can make the plastic. Many plastics are non-biodegradable, so they last for a very, very long time in the environment. This causes tremendous problems for land animals, but also for sea animals, because they somehow find their way into the oceans and they're consumed. Plastics can't really be burned safely. They produce some very toxic gases. They can be burnt, but it's actually quite difficult to control what comes off them when they burn, even though it produces a lot of energy. So in some places they do use them in power stations, but they have to have special systems to make sure no toxic gases go into the atmosphere. We need to think about some solutions. If we're making plastics, we need to use sustainable energy sources, like wind and solar. We need to use sustainable substances in the production, not fossil fuels. So try and find something in nature that we can use as a monomer to make a synthetic polymer. This typically is very positive as a step, because it also means that because it's a natural monomer, it can be broken down by bacteria. So it means that they can, if you make a plastic or you make a polymer bag from cellulose, from potatoes, for example, then that bag can actually decompose quite quickly when it's disposed of. We must recycle. We must recycle much more than we do. And we must try and use biodegradable polymers. So many plastics now have been developed that are actually biodegradable. They can be attacked by bacteria. We need to use other things instead of plastics, other materials, so we can avoid the use of plastics. Have a look at the YouTube video on plastics and their use and abuse. And there's some tips for you to think about on how to try to mitigate this problem, try to reduce this problem. All right, essential chemistry, several pages for you to look at and questions to answer. Natural polymers. There are 3 natural polymers you must be aware of. And we're really going to focus on the first 2 because the last one seems to have dropped off the syllabus, fats. They're found in foods. And you will have heard of, if you haven't heard of starch, or carbohydrates and proteins and fats, kind of common words in everyday language. Now, carbohydrates are made up of monomers, which are simple sugars. Okay? So simple sugar molecules, which come from photosynthesis, they come together in condensation polymerization reactions. We've just heard about them, to form complex carbohydrates. So the molecules join together with this kind of oxygen bridge. The end alcohols join with the next molecule along to form starch. You can signify this, you can abbreviate it as a molecule with two OH groups on each end, and then it attaches to the next sugar molecule. And if this is going to attach with an oxygen bridge, which molecule is going to be condensed? Which molecule is going to be lost? It's a water molecule, isn't it? Every time these two come together, we lose H2O and an oxygen forms the bridge. In proteins, the building blocks, the monomers, are amino acids. And an amino acid has an NH2 group on one end and a carbon, oxygen, hydrogen on the other, which we call a carboxylic acid group, COOH. Okay, that's why they're called amino acids. This is an amino group and this is an acid group. There are 20, aren't there? I think 20, or is it 22, that form life. So these amino acids, what happens is this acid group can attach to an amino group on another molecule. So they can form DNA and they can form proteins. That's what happens. It looks like this, doesn't it? When these come together, you can see that there's an amino group and it's attached to, look, a carbon double bond oxygen. So that's from the next acid group and they form long proteins. That's a bit simpler. You can see this a bit simpler. This is my amino acid. It's got an NH2 and a COOH, but the COOH has reacted with an NH2 on the next molecule. And each of these amino acids is different. Glycine and alanine and proline and etc. And they can form a long chain and they form proteins and other things. The links in these chains are amide links. So in chemistry, we call them amide links. So a protein would be a polyamide. But in biology, you call them peptide links. So it forms a polypeptide, doesn't it? This is condensation polymerization because every time the end of one molecule meets the end of the next, a water molecule is condensed. These are natural polyamides. Now, the reverse process is obviously possible. Hydrolysis means breaking up using water. Okay, so larger organic molecules can be broken up with water, usually in the presence of acid, could be an alkali, and they're broken into smaller pieces. Now, this typically happens with carbohydrates and proteins in your tummy. Your tummy's pH is about 2, and hydrolysis starts to happen. It starts in your mouth and then continues in your stomach. It's the reverse of the previous processes. So if I start with starch, carbohydrates, then I get glucose back, and then your body uses glucose. If I start with proteins, I get amino acids back. Here's an abbreviation of the process. Look, this would be starch. This would be my carbohydrate, and it's broken up into simple glucose monomers. This is my protein, and obviously you're adding water, and it's broken up into its amino acids. One thing to remember, and the book talks about this again, amino acids can be separated and identified using chromatography. We saw that in year 10, and you can practice it again. So there's quite a complicated technique, but you break up the proteins into amino acids, and then you separate them using chromatography, and you spray them with a locating agent, and you can see their RF value, and you can identify the amino acid. You'll revise that when you look through the book questions. Right, lots to do, people. Essential chemistry, do these pages first, because this is about natural polymers. And then you've got 3 lots of end of chapter questions. Lots to get on with.